everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Fenn.Talks Podcast. On today's episode, we're featuring one of our Fresno, California directors in our labor and employment practice group, Mr. Mark Kruthers. So Mark, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation focused on what businesses should be thinking about in 2022. For those individuals that haven't had the opportunity to meet you in person or possibly review your bio or see you speaking or presenting or even some of your other featured articles in the business community, would you mind just providing a high-level overview about who you are and a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I've been doing employment law for about 26 years now. Been mainly with our Fresno office before the merger and after the merger for the bulk of my career. Grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area and then moved to the Fresno area after law school and did a few different things from environmental law to basic business litigation, but ultimately settled into employment law, mainly because I like the opportunity to help businesses avoid problems before they actually happen. But by the same token, I've focused mainly on litigation as well, so helping to resolve problems once they get into the courts or the administrative system.
You mentioned a little bit more about your area of practice, but would you mind expanding on the types of companies or business leaders that you often work with, help, or serve?
Oh, sure. I actually am very lucky in that the client base that I get to work with ranges from mom and pop shops with one or two employees to companies with offices and operations in multiple states or countries with thousands of employees. And obviously the services to be provided really are going to differ based on the company. With some of those smaller companies, they like to treat us and treat me in particular as almost their HR person or their general counsel to be able to help guide them through those day-to-day things. Larger companies, they obviously have a fully operational HR staff that we assist. And if litigation arises or we need to make appearances in front of state or federal administrative agencies, we're able to do that to help them.
Now, I think it's safe to say that in 2020, 2021, more companies than ever needed assistance as it related to labor and employment law. There were a lot of questions, especially those relating to COVID-19, best practices and policies to put into play. So curious, based on the conversations that you've had with those businesses over the last 12 or 24 months, what are some of your biggest takeaways that you think would be helpful for other employers to know moving into 2022?
I think the biggest thing is everybody talked about the hopeful ability to return to normal. And I don't think there's going to be a return to normal. What the COVID-19 pandemic has showed us, both small and larger businesses, is there's a different way of doing things. And things that businesses maybe were not comfortable attempting before, such as allowing remote work, they were forced to do it in order to keep operating. And now they've got employees that enjoy that situation. They enjoy not having the commute. And we're seeing it manifest in different ways in different parts of the country where we have clients. In places like, say, Fresno, where the commute's not as bad, it's not as big of an issue. But in places like Phoenix or Denver, where sometimes employees are commuting an hour between their home and work, well, the ability to have remote work really changed things dramatically for them and help their life-work balance significantly. So while we've tried to deal with a lot of the problems that are associated with getting people back in the workplace, a lot of the questions we've been fielding is how do we adapt to the situation where not everybody's going to come back? And can we operate in that fashion? And how do we do it in an effective manner that helps the business, helps the business's customers, and satisfies the needs of the employees?
So for those that are unfamiliar, perhaps they haven't worked with a labor and an employment attorney before. So for those individuals that are relatively new to this process, can you explain a little bit more about what your role is as an attorney in helping companies to navigate that?
Sure. One of the things that I enjoy most about my job is the preventative medicine aspect of it. So I encourage my clients, if they have a situation where they have a difficult disciplinary issue they have to address, an employee termination, mass layoffs, that they give me a call first to walk through exactly what they want to accomplish, exactly what the impact's going to be on both the business and the employees. And then let's figure out the safest way to do it in the context of the various employment laws. As a lot of people know, here in California, we have an extraordinary complex web of employment laws, rules, and regulations that a lot of employers don't have access to or don't know where to look to find them. And some of them can be contrary to normal business judgment. And that's where it becomes important to reach out first and spend a few minutes on the phone to say, hey, we want to do X. And then my job is to make sure I tell you the best and safest way to do X.
And just based on, the matters that you've been handling over the last 12 or 24 months, you mentioned that you also do some litigation for labor and employment as well. Would you mind just expanding on what types of litigation as it relates to labor and employment, not getting into specifics, but, just from a high level, how you could help some other employers in the market?
Right. Well, there's actually different types. I mean, we represent employers at administrative hearings here in California before the California Labor Commissioner, and that'll address issues like employees who have claims for wages they weren't paid. We also address things in front of both the federal and state administrative agencies that enforce and regulate discrimination, harassment, retaliation, those types of matters. And then also the traditional litigation in both federal and state courts, where an employer will get sued by an employee or former employee, or what's very common in California, an entire class of employees. And we help the employer navigate that, represent them, and hopefully get them to a point where they get a beneficial result.
So a lot of companies are in the process of business planning. They're preparing for next year. They're thinking through some of their strategies, whether they're growing, expanding, maybe consolidating, whatever that may look like. And an attorney or legal professional can certainly serve as a key resource in helping to navigate some of that. So for businesses that are preparing for next year, what would you encourage them to think about as it relates to working closely with an attorney?
Number one, what do they want to accomplish? Are they trying hard to get back to business as usual where they were before the pandemic? Are they trying to take a new direction? Are they, as you mentioned, consolidating? Are they expanding? And how is that going to look? And how is that going to impact their policies? Because a business, with respect to their workforce, it's almost like a parent raising a child. As the business gets older, as the workforce grows, you've got to be flexible and you've got to do things differently. The things that you did when you first started operating are usually not the things that are going to be effective for you or beneficial for your employees 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And that's what I encourage most of my clients as we get towards the end of each calendar year, because January 1 is kind of a tipping point for most businesses when they want to roll out new policies or change things. As we get towards the end of the calendar year, give me a call, give any of our attorneys a call, and sit down and kind of plan out, what are you going to do next year? What changes are you going to make? And how can we start crafting policies and procedures that best allow you to get there with minimal amount of disturbance?
And just curious, do you have any additional questions or things for them to think about as they look above and beyond just 12 months out? So if they're looking at their 5 to 10 year plan, or is there anything else you would encourage them to start thinking through?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you have a business that has that much thought ahead and they're looking at 5 or 10 years, clearly, what do you expect the composition of your workforce to be? And what I mean by that is, are you going to have a lot of in-person individuals working? Are you going to need larger space? Are you going to be a multi-site employer? Because those things really change the tenor of how you're going to enforce your policies and the benefits you're going to provide and those types of things. And it's better to know that now as you're going forward, because the last thing we want to have happen is spend a bunch of time now writing and drafting policies, handbooks, getting things in place where 2 or 3 years or 5 years down the road, we know they're going to be obsolete. So let's figure out, if you know that's where you're going to go, there's a lot of decisions that can be made now that can make it easier for that transition when the time comes.
Mark, I know you talked to a number of different business leaders and different executives throughout the business community, but I'm curious, what are some of the most commonly asked questions that you get that might be helpful for our listeners?
A lot of it, amazingly, is how do we make our employees happy? I mean, a lot of companies think that they're doing everything they can, that they're providing all the benefits they can for their employees, and they don't understand why they're getting trapped in these claims or lawsuits or arguments when they're just trying to do what they think is right. And that's one of the big things that we always get is, Mark, how can we stay out of trouble? Well, that's not always, that's a very loaded question because trouble comes in many different forms. But a lot of that is kind of sitting back and again, thinking about your workforce, thinking about how you want them to feel treated and how you need to treat them in order to accomplish the business goals that you have. And that's really some of the biggest conversations that we have.
So, of everything we've discussed today, do you have any specific takeaway that you're hopeful that listeners will hold on to and will really remember from this conversation?
Just that the workforce is changing and it's a changing landscape and you've got to be able to adapt. And this is probably not going to be the only time in the next 10 or 15 years that we have situations like this arise. And so I think employers need to plan for that and understand that especially in crucial times like we experienced with the COVID-19 pandemic, flexibility is key. Being able to be flexible with your workforce, with the services you provide, benefits your customers, it benefits the business, and it benefits your employees.
Mark, I know you'd like to stay up to date on some of the key trends that are happening in the labor and employment space. So are there any publications, books, blogs, resources that you would encourage other employers to look into?
Well, I mean, we have a lot here in California because California is different than most states. One of the easiest things that employers can do is look at their state or local chamber of commerce, because a lot of times they will have links to various articles and materials that you can use to stay up to date on things. But also, we regularly post stuff and try to get information out there for our clients. So certainly peruse our website. And if you think of something, just reach out and call and ask a question. If you wonder if there's a major issue coming up or you heard something on the news, certainly give one of us a ring and we can direct you to an area that you can look at if we can't answer the question for you.
Great. Well, Mark, as we look to wrap up today's conversation, is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with?
Not really. I think we've pretty much covered a lot. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody, and I hope we were provided some information.
Wonderful. Well, Mark, thanks so much for joining us on this episode and helping other businesses to think through what they should be doing as we look towards 2022.
Certainly.